Hello, hello. Have you missed me? I have been gone for 3 weeks, which is really unusual for me. I have been doing this podcast for 4.5 years. This is the 413th episode, and I needed a break. A lot has been going on with me in the last 2 months. My mom died. And so dealing with that, and not only the emotional circumstances with that, but just dealing with what you have to do when somebody dies. Then I had my 15th wedding anniversary. This is my second marriage. So that was actually because I was married 25 years the first time. So it was actually was that 40th? If I'm doing the math correct, 25 and 15 is 40. Because I like to add them together to just show that I've been married a long time. So we did that. We went away for like 3 days. And then I went to Charleston, South Carolina, rented a Airbnb on the beach at Isle of Palms. If you've never been there, it's gorgeous, just north of Charleston. My daughter lives in that area of Charleston, only 4 miles from the beach. So it was great because I had my own place and I got to have the kids. I had all four of her kids one night, ages 5 to 13, and it was the 5-year-old, my granddaughter's first sleepover. And so we were very excited about that. And she did very well. And the last night, I had the littles, as we call them, her 5 and 7-year-old. And then she's got 11 and 13. And then I brought the two middle grandkids, the two boys, home, 7 and 11. I brought them home with me, little detour to see their cousins. My other daughter, her oldest son was having his 6th birthday party. So that was a treat because the cousins don't get to spend a lot of time together because they live 6 hours apart. So that was a real treat for me to get to spend time with four of my six grandchildren. So we did that, came back to my house in Virginia. And then they were here a week with me. So I'm very, very happy that I got to have this downtime. I think it's so important that we take downtime. And I'm someone who go, 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 go. And I pride myself on the fact that I have done an episode a week and often two a week for 4.5 years. And I haven't missed a week. And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I can't miss an episode. I can't miss an episode. But then number one is stressing me out. And number two is taking joy out of spending time and thinking that I had to record podcast episodes and coordinate all of the things that are associated with it when I really wanted to just focus on my time with my grandkids and with my husband prior to seeing the grandkids. So I just was like, I'm gonna unplug and that'll be okay. That'll be okay. And then I'll get started again when all of the hubbub dies down. So the hubbub has died down. I am home. I am so excited. I took them back. I unloaded them yesterday, and I can't be more excited to be back into a normal routine. Being a parent in this day and age is not easy. And plus, I had girls. So a 7-11-year-old boy, that takes a lot of energy. And kids that aren't used to traveling a lot, they're home in their own beds. They have their own space. They're very lucky. They each have their own bedroom. And these two spent the week on the pull-out sofa because that's where the TV was. And so they would go to bed and we'd put on a show or a movie, and that would be the wind down time. And they really enjoyed that. And we had a great time. We did a lot with them. Trampoline park, movie, Monticello, Luray Caverns, Rope Adventure Park, maze, toy store. We tried to have a pretty full plate for them. And so I am just glad to be back and have my normal routine. So, what I decided to do to relieve a little bit of the stress from having to plan and coordinate everything to do with my podcast is went back and looked at episodes that have done well in the past that had a good topic that seemed to resonate with listeners. What I found is it was so interesting because the one that was one of the top 20 was one specifically about leaving a legacy. So this person, Merle Saferstein, she was so interesting and amazing as a guest. One, who I really want you to listen to because of my experience with my mother. It was so timely when I looked at that episode and that it had done well. I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is really what I feel needs to be talked about in light of how my mom spent her last 17 years of her life, which was not leaving any kind of legacy. It was basically quickly digressing into being bedridden." And so I think it's a question we should ask ourselves. It's how do you want to be remembered? When you leave here, and we're all going to leave here, what people, what are they going to say about you? What memories are they going to have about you? And it's really about your life. What impact have you made? And it doesn't have to be a big impact. My mother could have made an impact in just being with her daughters and her grandchildren and her great grandchildren. She didn't even know her great grandchildren's names. And it wasn't because she had dementia. She knew me, she knew my sister, she knew our kids when my dad died, which is when her decline started. My sisters and my children were adults. They had all finished college. And so we were very fortunate that our children knew my parents, but she didn't know their kids. And she could have known her grandchildren's kids, but she chose to just disengage, leaving no legacy or impact other than the one that she had lived up until that time, which was being a guidance counselor, a great English teacher. But she could have significantly given value and made an impact in her immediate family's life, in addition to impact she could have made in the world. And I tried to get her engaged in volunteering at a school. What could she have done with her experience to help children? And so it's important that I think you live your legacy in something that is interesting to you because that's going to make you happy. So it has to be something that's interesting to you and you feel valued about as well because that's what's going to give you the spark, which is what this podcast is all about. And so I love Merle's example. She is living her legacy. She has been living a legacy. And the thing that I love about Merle is that she followed her heart with everything that she did. She did something that lit her up. And if it didn't, then she waited for something. We talk about this one incident where something happened. It was kind of the universe put somebody in her life very magically. And this led to how she made a legacy later in her life. But it's like she didn't rush into anything. She didn't take a job to make money, which many of us take a job because we need the money. But she was somebody who was patient. She was somebody who would feel that the right thing would come and it would come. In one case, she volunteered in something that was interesting to her. There was no employment offered or opportunity. Guess what? That led to something that made a huge impact. So I love the fact that she followed her heart in that something that was interesting to her, something that excited her, something that she felt that she could do and make an impact in. And then she just let it evolve. She let it appear when it wasn't even visible, but she just let her heart lead her, is really the example that she has in her stories that she tells. So, yeah, so I think we should be very aware and cognizant about how we're using our time, that in a way that speaks to a passion that we might have, something that lights us up, but also brings light to the world. And Merle does that. And my mother didn't do it. My mother wasted 17 years of her life. No legacy at all that she left in the last 17 years. And it's lost forever. She could have done something different. And so I thought this episode would impress upon whoever listened to it how valuable the time we have left is and how we should really think about how we want to spend it. And I'm grateful that I spent it in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, really, focusing on my mom, visiting my mom in her last days, spending time with my husband for our anniversary, spending time with my grandchildren. I could have not spent time with my grandkids. I could have just worked and said, I don't have time, but I want them to remember me. And I don't know how long I have or how long I'll have my youth or feeling vim, vigor, and vitality. I don't know how long I'll have that. And so the more time I can spend with them, they don't live close, the more it's kind of leaving a legacy in a sense because they're going to remember me, the time they spend with me and the things we do and the memories we make and the pictures and the videos that we create. And so on a very, very small, low impact level, that's leaving a legacy. And so my question to you is, how do you want to leave a legacy? How do you want to be remembered? And are you actually planning the time and focusing your time on how that is making an impact to the people you love and to the world around you? And Merle's a great example of that. Welcome to another episode of Living Your Spark Second Half. And man, do I have a good guest today. She is a perfect example of someone who is living her sparked second half. Merle Saferstein. Hello.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here and anxious to talk to you about this.
Yes. And if you could see Merle, if you're on my YouTube channel, she is sitting in this most beautiful garden. And she said that's her backyard. She lives in Miami. So it's gorgeous. Some people have virtual backgrounds. And I thought for sure that was so beautiful. It must have been a virtual background. But Merle is 78. And I want to start with that because we just met. She actually had a publicist reach out to me to schedule this. And so we were just getting to know each other. And she is so youthful. You're just so young and vibrant and gushing with energy, but you're so interested in me. You know, it was funny because she was asking me all these questions and I felt like I was on her podcast. She doesn't even have one, but she's so interested in people and life, that social connection, which is so vital when we get older. And I just think you're going to really enjoy hearing from Merle and her story.
One of the things I learned was that I learn a lot more if I listen than I talk.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I'm on podcasts, I want to know who I'm talking to. So thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I'm still learning. It's like I like to talk a lot. And it's when you talk, you don't hear anything.
It's true, but I like to talk too.
Yeah. So, why don't you share a little bit about your story? We were just talking about how both of our mothers told us that we shouldn't do the thing that we wanted to do because it wasn't secure enough or wasn't going to make enough money or, reasons that they were trying to be helpful, but we ended up going down a path that we probably wouldn't have gone, that was more logical versus more heart driven. And then isn't it interesting how we do that and then we finally come back to where we're meant to be if we're smart enough to do that, if we're brave enough to do that, because it is a scary thing to kind of like, okay, I don't think that was right. Let me try this other thing. So
Right.
yeah.
When I grew up in the 60s, the only jobs that women had mostly were nurses and teachers. And while I knew I am an educator, I mean, that first and foremost, that's who I am. I really did have the desire to become a psychologist. And my mom, like you said, my mother just said no, no. And I don't regret. I was very fortunate because I had a really wonderful career. I started out as an elementary education teacher. I worked, I directed a preschool for a few years. And at some point, I became a Holocaust educator. And that happened just by chance, by meeting someone on the beach, and the rest is history. But I was
Well, describe that. I
okay,
love stories like that.
okay, this is a great story. I had quit my job. I was working as an administrative assistant at a high school with a boss who was a narcissist and a really difficult man. And his secretary felt like she had total reign over me, and she would not let me do anything without her permission. It was a messy situation.
Very toxic.
Yeah.
And how old were you, just to give some
So I was,
context there?
at the time I was 82, I was 38.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared an office with someone who was a psychologist. And one day he said to me, you know, Merle, you're in such a no-win situation. And I loved the fact that I was creating a PTA and I was working with student government and doing all those really fun things that I loved, but it was just not good. So I quit and I started walking. I live near a beach and I started walking the beach every day. And while I was jogging on the shore and walking. I met a man who was doing the same thing I was doing. We would jog by each other every morning. We were sitting very close to each other. And this was during Christmas vacation. And it was right before I quit. And he was writing and I was writing and he was reading and I was reading. One day he stopped to talk to me. So his name is Tom and he had just left the priesthood. And he was working on a documentary, and then he left Miami. So he was only here for a month that I knew him. And then he left, and then I quit my job. And we started to write to each other and continued writing letters on a daily basis. And Tom he had several jobs, but he ended up in New York. And he ended up doing PR for an operetta on the Diary of Anne Frank. And the person who produced it and who is the president of the Anne Frank Center asked him if he would like to come and be the director of the Anne Frank Center. At the same time, someone had found a photograph album of Anne Frank in their dresser in Germany and sent it to the Anne Frank Center in Amsterdam. Anne Frank Center created an 800 photographic exhibition on Anne Frank in the world, but also surrounded by the Holocaust. And so Tom, my friend's job was to send this around the country. And he called me up. I wasn't working. He knew that I journaled. I've been journaling since 1974, and I was really spending a lot of time writing. And Tom said, would you like to bring this to Miami? And at that point, I really needed a job. I mean, it was time. It was 2 years later, and I had to be working, but it was a volunteer job. And my husband said to me, you have to do this. It speaks to your soul. How could you not? Anne Frank has always spoken to your soul.
It gives me chills. I'm like, they're continuing chills. I don't get that very often. Yeah, I read, that was something I had to read in elementary school.
Right.
And it was so powerful, so powerful. So I think most of the people who are listening to this, since a lot of them are our age, probably have a very similar feeling about that story. Right. And it's weird because it's almost like he's like a soul. I think you have soulmates. I think when I was younger, I used to think there's one soulmate and it's that love of your life. But I believe now we have soulmates. I think my roommates in college are my soulmates. It sounds like you guys really had this spiritual connection.
We did. And so I brought the exhibit to Miami, and it was the first city to have the exhibit. And my goal was to have 50,000 people and an editorial in the Miami Herald. And it was a 6-week exhibit. We had well over 60,000 and the editorial. And I did a lot of student programming. And as a result of that, 2 of the women from the Holocaust Center in Miami came to one of the programs. I had invited them to come. And they then called me after the exhibit and said, would you come volunteer and help us do student programming? So I went as a volunteer. And 2 weeks later, their secretary quit. And they called me and said, would I be interested in being a secretary? And I said, I'll do it for 3 months, but if I'm not in the education department, I'm out of there. And they had just hired someone with her PhD. And so that was not going to happen, but she ended up to be a disaster. And so they fired her. the president of the center at the time was the president of one of the universities in South Florida. And he took me to lunch and grilled me for 3 hours and said, okay, you can do this job. And so I became the director of educational outreach at the Holocaust Center in Miami.
Okay, stop.
Okay.
Like, more chills. This is such a great example of what I always say, because you never know what something is going to lead you to. And here you are. Probably most people would say, no, I'm not going to take that volunteer job because that's not going to pay me money initially when Tom asked you to do that for 6 weeks.
Right.
But
Right.
you did it. You did it anyway. It was a stepping stone to the next thing, which then was a stepping stone to that which was so aligned with your soul and your heart. And it didn't take long.
No, it didn't take long. And so I was at the center, I think, for about six months. Maybe not, no, it wasn't even 6 months before I went into that position, and then stayed there for 26 years and had the amazing opportunity to work with about 500 Holocaust survivors.
Oh,
And,
that's so amazing. So amazing. I have to tell you too that I have visited Dachau in Germany. Yeah. Not many people get the opportunity to visit a concentration camp. That is, I was 18 and I went over there on a school trip. My grandparents paid for, and it was funny because I wanted them to just give me money. And they said, no, only a trip to Europe, take it or leave it.
Wow.
So I was by myself. And so I hooked up with a school. It was, a group thing, but most of the kids were from a high school near me. I actually, this is even funnier. It was a high school present, graduation present, and I didn't do it because I wanted the money. And I waited a year for them to give me the money, and they wouldn't give me the money. And so finally I was like, rats, okay, I guess I'll go. So I missed kind of the boat of going with people my age. So I was a year, well, actually a year ahead in school. So they were really all my age, but it was a 2-week trip and we went to several different countries, and I'd never been to any of I hadn't been outside of the US. Such an amazing experience, but so much of that trip is with me today. I mean, it just like made such an impression on me. And that concentration camp, it's unbearable to be that, be on those hallowed grounds. Yeah. It's just like, it's just unimaginable, really. Yeah.
It is. And through the whole experience of working all those years with Holocaust survivors, just for me, what I learned from them was the resilience of the human spirit. For people to have experienced the kinds of things that they experienced that are really unimaginable to any one of us, and to pick up the pieces and to begin a new life, to bring life into the world, is really remarkable. And so for me, I did a lot of student programming. By the time I left, at the very end, we were writing a grant, and we had to figure out how many people since the beginning of the Holocaust Center or the beginning of our student programming, how many lives did we touch? And that's between these prejudice reduction programs where we had students sitting at a table with 10 students, a Holocaust survivor, and a facilitator. And there were anywhere from 250 to 800 students at a time. And I did 10 to 12 of those a year. And that was college and high school students. And then we did a teacher institute every year, teaching teachers how to teach the Holocaust. We did a huge visual arts and writing contest. And we also had a speakers bureau that sent speakers out to 18,000 people on an average a year. And so we, at the very end, when I left, we had almost reached 1 million children whose lives we had touched, which to me was just remarkable. I mean, I had no idea till I started really doing the math and figuring out if one teacher teaches X number of students. And it was really an amazing, wonderful opportunity. But to leave there was not easy, so I was loving my career, and yet I knew there was still more.
Yeah. So one thing that came up for me is that it's so important to have meaning in what we do. And what you did had meaning in so many ways because you were affecting the lives of the Holocaust survivors. I'm breaking into this episode for an important announcement. My in-person Get Sparked Live retreat is officially open for registration, and you are invited. That is, if you're interested in a unique event designed for women over 50, where you'll get to connect with your true spirit and meet other like-minded souls who want to do the same. You'll gain new knowledge that will reveal new possibilities, and you'll ignite the spark within that will have you steered in the right direction, leading you to a happier and more fulfilling future. During this weekend experience, you'll discover how to unlock your own innate ability to transform yourself and your life ahead by being exposed to various modalities, tools, and exercises that will open your eyes to who you truly are and get you aligned with the most authentic version of you, so you can stop feeling stuck and start focusing on the value you bring to the world. We have a jam-packed schedule that includes a bit of curriculum, some group activities like a sound healing session, and you'll get the most fantastical goodie bag with items that the universe has picked just for you and other cool surprises. But honestly, the best way I can sum up what you'll walk away from this weekend with is a quote from one of the women who attended my last retreat. She said, quote, "It will change your life," end quote. If this sounds like an event you don't want to miss, then get registered ASAP, because this is an intimate event with only 20 spots available and there are only a few left. Go to notyouraverage-grandma.com/retreat to learn more and grab your spot. Now enjoy the rest of this episode. By allowing them to tell their story, and you are affecting the children, the people that heard the stories and were impacted by those stories. It's just like, I can't imagine how much of a difference that made to so many people. I mean, you talk about the number of lives, but when you talk about the meaning that goes with those lives that you injected into these people, wow, I can see how that would be hard to leave.
So for me, I've never been able to do anything unless it's meaningful. That's just, I have always needed to fill my soul. And when I don't, for example, the 2 years that I wasn't working, I would sit in interviews and I would be choking and think there is no way I could take this job. And I needed to work. I mean, it wasn't like we had the luxury of my not working, but I couldn't. I just knew that I had to do what spoke to my soul. And
that's very unusual. And you are very brave for doing that.
Yeah, it was really important to me. And
you must have a supportive partner.
I do. 56 years of marriage. He was wonderful. He was really wonderful in supporting me in that, in everything I've done, really.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say is happy wife, happy life. Right. I love that saying when I heard it, and I didn't hear it. It was probably like 10 years ago at a wedding. I heard it and I was like, that is so true, but it goes both ways, right? Happy husband, happy life. But when you follow your heart and are lit up with what you do, he gets such benefits.
Absolutely. No question, because I'm happy all the time. You know, I walk in happy. In fact, when I retired and I started doing new things, he said to me, "Are you ever going to stop smiling?" And I said, "No, that is not going to happen." So,
I really so great. Yeah, I am a big smiler. I saw a T-shirt when I was in Sedona at the Life, what is it called? It's a shop that sells the Life is Good, the Life is Good brand.
I know that shop. I was there.
Yeah, and it's called. It said, oh gosh, now I'm gonna forget what it said, but it was like something to do with smiling. I'm like, I'll think of it and I'll have to put it in the show notes, but maybe it'll come to me by the end of the episode. But yeah, it was like, I already had picked out a T-shirt. So I was like, I wanted to get that one. I was like, oh, I'll have to get that next time. Yeah. But I love that. So what do you left the job that was so meaningful to do what?
So here's what happened. I knew that there were other things I wanted to do. And I also, there were issues at the center, and I felt like it was time. I felt like I had done everything that I really wanted to accomplish. And so I took a year. So from January of 2011 till December 29th, when I walked out the door at the end of that year, I spent a year looking at what I wanted my life to look like. And what I did was I presented to myself 25 questions. Questions like, how will you make money? What is going to make you happy? If you write, is that going to be a full-time job? Is that going to be enough for you when you've had so much interaction? And I really am a people person. So I asked myself all those questions. One of the questions that I asked myself is, who am I? And of course, I've been journaling for so long that was something I certainly could answer easily. But I answered it in 4 pages. I spent a lot of time on that question. And then the next week, the question was, who will I be when I am no longer the director of educational outreach? And so I said, before I answer that, I'm going to go back and look at what I wrote. And I had not once mentioned my title or my job at the Holocaust Center. And then I said, okay, then that's not an issue. That is not, I'm not who I am defined by what I did.
Yeah. And so many people do that. The identity is so wrapped up into when I quit my corporate job for the first time, because I've had a few stints going back and forth. But when I did quit it for the first time, it was so hard to be in a social situation when people said, what do you do? And it's like,
right.
And when I was in network marketing at the time, and I sell,
whatever.
Beachbody. I sell Shakeology. I sell challenge groups. And that's like, huh? Yeah. Yeah. So it's just hard because it's easy to identify in the culture we have with titles.
Right. When my husband retired from his practice of podiatry, I kept saying, you need to think of what you're going to do before you retire, because it's really important. And he didn't. He kept saying, I will. And he retired and he said, I have no purpose. And basically that's how he's lived the rest of his life. And that just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So
is he still around?
Yes, he is still around. He's watching a lot of television.
Oh.
So
hopefully not the news.
I think we're dealing with the news, especially in Florida right now. We need to not be watching the news. So what I came up with was I knew that I wanted to do a few things. I knew I wanted to teach. I knew I wanted to write, and I knew I wanted to volunteer. And by the time I finished and walked out the door, I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. And what I decided was I'd wanted to write this one book about a hotel in Hollywood Beach that since 1985, I wanted to do that. And I got my job at the Holocaust Center in the beginning of 86. And so I just couldn't do that and raise the family and do everything else. But I never forgot about the book. So what I did was I didn't always take a lunch hour, but when I did take a lunch hour, I would go in the lunchroom and write. I would journal or work on this legacy project that I was starting. And so I wanted everyone to see that I'm a writer. I wanted them to understand. So when I left, I could say I'm leaving because it's time to write a book. And for the survivors, especially because I had become so attached to so many, they really gave me their blessing. They said, you've done your work, you go write. But I also, during that year, while I was writing, I kept thinking, what am I going to teach? I mean, who I am is a teacher, and I knew that I needed to do that. And so 6 months in, I was writing in my journal, and the word legacy came down on the page. And I said, maybe there's something to that. I've been helping the survivors pass along their legacy of remembrance for all these years. So maybe I can do something with that. And before I left the center, I had developed a course called Living and Leaving Your Legacy, which I started teaching the following October. So I first wrote a book. And then when I sent the book in to be published, I started teaching this class. And I also started volunteering with a hospice organization. At the time, they were just forming a camp for children who had lost, family members And I had directed a day camp for children for 350 kids for 5 years. So I said, oh, I can help you with that. So I got really involved and worked as a volunteer. I also then eventually started training their staffs, different hospice staffs, on doing legacy work. And so that's kind of where my career took me after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell me more about the Living and Leaving Your Legacy program, because it sounds like it's like some kind of course people can take.
Right. It is a course. So basically, what I did was I started out with an 8-week course, and I figured I'm going to do four weeks on living your legacy and 4 weeks on leaving your legacy. And
Oh, yeah.
so basically my feeling is that how we live our life becomes our legacy. And even if you don't do anything in terms of some kind of legacy project, people are going to remember you for how you were, how you acted, not necessarily what you said, but how you acted. And so that was the premise of that, that piece of the course. And then I would do different legacy projects. So there are all kinds of projects. People can do an interview, just a video interview of themselves. They can do an audio recording of themselves. They can do a scrapbook, write a memoir, journal to someone. For example, I have journals for each of my grandchildren that I've been writing since the day they were born.
Oh,
You can do a collage, you can do a legacy letter, you can do an ethical will, which is a form of a letter to whomever you choose. It can be to your loved ones, it can be specifically to your children, grandchildren, friends. One of the things that's really important in my legacy work is to understand that one does not have to be a parent in order to leave a legacy, that we touch lives, and friends, people in our lives are interested in that. So for a few sessions, I did it that way. And then as I moved through this, I realized that really the bottom line is it's much more about how you're living your life than what you leave behind. And so then the course became 6 weeks of living your life and 2 weeks of projects. And since October of 2013, I've taught 68 classes and lecture. I do a lot of lecturing and speaking and workshops, basically helping people understand the importance of how they live their life and not put off what they love doing. Fill your life with joy in the moment. So that's the basic course that I've done.
mm. So what is it that you want people, like, first of all, who is it for? Because it sounds like it could be for anyone.
It is for anyone.
Yeah. And secondly, like, what is the transformation you want them to have from beginning to end at the end of it, when they look back and say, oh my God, that was whatever. What do you want them to have?
So the youngest person who's ever taken my class was 38 years old. She was in a class with a man who was 92. And I will never forget this. He looked at her and he said, what in the hell are you doing here? And she said, she actually came because she wanted to get her parents to do some kind of legacy project. But that really changed, and she continued on and realized that for herself. And what she said is, I want to live the best life I can. And so what I stress is that we all want to know we matter. And I help people look at their lives and understand how they can live the best life. And that to me is really my goal. And all of this is to help people understand that we have choices and we are going to be remembered for what we're doing in our lives on a daily basis. So basically, I mean, I've taught these classes and now I'm feeling like there needs to be a transition. So I'm moving to the next step as a result of having written the books I just wrote.
And what the next step? What is that?
So the next step. So I just finished a project that I started in 2002. In 2002, I had accumulated 340 journals that I had filled.
Oh,
And
yeah. I read that in your
right.
application.
And,
Yeah.
and I decided, and I debated, I have two children. I debated whether to leave my journals to them. And at one point I said to myself, there's no way I can leave these journals to my children because I wrote them for myself. They're for my eyes only. And then I thought, but maybe there's something in here to pass along. As an educator, I kept thinking, I can't possibly have filled this many journals without having some words of wisdom, something to share. And so I decided to embark on this project where I was going to go back and read my journals. So the journals in the project go from 1974 to 2016. And by 2016, I had accumulated 259 journals. Now I have 359 journals. Now I have 380 journals. But the project goes from there. And so what I did was I picked topics in my life. I started out with 40 topics. I ended up with 70 topics. For 20 years, for 14 years. It took me 14 years to go back, read the journals, take excerpts according to different topics, put them into the computer. When I finished in 2016, at the end of 2016, I finished that phase of it. I had 70 topics with anywhere from 75 to 450 pages, typewritten one-space pages. And then I had to determine what it was I wanted to share. And some of it I knew even when I took it out of the journal, no one was ever going to see it, but I wasn't done looking at it.
Yeah.
So I picked 22 topics and decided I would write 2 books with 11 topics in each. And then I had to go back and whittle down those topics to chapters that were reasonable in size. And so, if you think about, for example, parenting was 450 pages, marriage was 450 pages. I had to just keep whittling down until I got to around 30 pages. And that took me 5 years. And then I took a year to edit volume 1, which I published last June, and then just published last week, published the second volume.
That's amazing. So each topic is like a chapter.
Each topic is a chapter. It stands alone. The thread goes from 1974 to 2016, except cases like the Anne Frank exhibit, where I started in May of 85 and finished it in January of 86, or the March of the Living when I went on to Poland and Israel with groups, to visit the concentration camps. Those are just very specific 2 weeks, but 30 pages long. And going back and looking at my life and seeing, there are lots of books that are written in journal form and they're chronological, but this is chronological, but it's also a subject. So I look at my journals as a tapestry, and I look at the chapters as threads of the tapestry.
Right. So it's the chronological within the topic. Yeah. I love that. What an interesting concept and idea. What did you title the first volume?
So both volumes are titled Living and Leaving My Legacy, as opposed to Your Legacy. And when I decided to share it, so initially it was going to just be my children, my nieces, my nephews, people I was close to. But then as I started realizing there's really information here for a lot of people, I decided to share it for 2 reasons. The first was because I want to encourage people to journal. I want them to understand the benefits of journaling. To have my life for all those years in a way that, we think we remember things, but there's no way. I remember a lot more because I wrote. I'm convinced that my memory is really sharp as a result of that. There's very little that I read in my journals as I was reading them that I didn't remember or remembered differently. Maybe a name every once in a while. I think I have no idea who that person is, but for the most part, I really do remember.
Yeah, I have a question on that because as you were describing that, I thought, wow, I didn't journal all those years ago. I did write my husband when we dated in college a poem that he kept. So when he became my second husband, he pulled the poem out and he still had it. I was like, oh, Oh, yes, I remember that when I was crazy in love with you. But that, yeah, other than that, I really didn't keep any type of journal except when I was required to do so in like English seventh grade.
Right.
So when you read back your life, you're out of that period in your life. That's your past, and you've evolved in all those years. You've become somebody different. You've grown, you've developed. So you have what I always like to say is a new brain, or a more evolved brain, a more expanded brain. How was that reading that back and kind of reliving it?
What struck me was that I am still the exact same person I was then. And there were times I could see real growth. So in my marriage, I could see growth as a parent. But for the most part, I was shocked actually at how much I haven't changed. Who I am has not changed. My behaviors have sometimes changed. That piece wasn't as striking to me as going back and reading some of the painful times. If someone had told me years ago that half my journals would be filled with pain and half with good things, I never would have believed it because I feel like such a positive person. However, what I realized is in writing about those painful times, I worked through and changed my attitude. And so that was really surprising to me. The other thing, my husband kept saying to me, why would you want to go back to all that tough stuff? And I kept saying, I have to. I needed to go back and see. And I did really understand. I mean, there were certain areas we had some financial difficulties. I really understood the role I didn't take, what I didn't do, and was able to really say, okay, I made these mistakes. And it was all there in black and white because I was writing, I mean, from 82 on, I was writing multiple times a day. I mean, I had my journal with me all the time. And so I have a huge record. I mean, people in my life will call me and say, can you go back and see when, what happened then? The other thing, while I was taking excerpts on topics, if there were excerpts on people that I thought they would want to see, I would then copy those excerpts out and share it. The other thing you said about the time. So if you think about this, I was reading in one time. I was then taking the topics in another time and putting them onto the computer. And then I was living in another time. So I was sometimes in 3 different time zones and would say to myself, I'm not sure what day it is. I have to look at the calendar because I'm like lost in all these different time periods. So that was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I think that it's such an interesting exercise because I believe the older I've gotten, the more empathetic I've gotten and the more understanding. And so looking back at those mistakes that you made just with a different perspective has got to be super valuable.
Right. I became less judgmental for sure.
Yeah, me too. Well, when I understood that judging people meant I was like, there was something in them that was in me that I needed to work out. And when I realized that, I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a mirror. So the other thing
can I interrupt
sure.
and just say the second reason why I'm sharing the book is because I want people to look at my life, not because it's my life, but to look at my life as a mirror into their own and to really look at that. So at the end of each chapter, I have journal prompts where people could actually answer questions based on the topics. And then I have reflection of what I felt going back and reading these journal prompts. And in some cases, there are several years now that 7 years actually.
Yeah.
So going back and seeing that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you're making it more like they're involved. So it's activity driven. And so that's very valuable. So the last thing that I wanted before we wrap up is one of my challenges, and I know it's one of my students' challenges, because a lot of times my students are just like former me. So I know them well. But I write down, need to journal more, or like my goal is to journal times a week. And it's like, it's always felt to me like more of an assignment versus like, oh, I just want to journal. It'd be so nice because I have this workaholism issue. I always feel like I need to be busier, fill things up. And journaling to me is more of it's not an activity that I feel like I'm getting stuff done, even though I know it's really important. I know. So, what tips can you give the listener because you said you wrote several times a day, and what tip can you give somebody just to get started? Like, how long should they write? Should they set a timer? Should they do it at the same time every day? How can they kind of make that a habit that will stick?
I think the very best thing to do is to understand, first of all, the gift that you're giving yourself. And so, while you say it's not, you're not being productive or whatever, I want to tell you, Lori, that I realize that I have given myself the greatest gift by having a record of my life in the way I do. So, and another thing is, it's a companion. There are times where I work through issues. If I have an issue with someone, I might do a dialogue in my journal or write that personal letter in my journal. And so there are lots of ways to do that are really productive and constructive, but it is such a therapeutic tool. What I say to people is, yes, it's probably, it depends on the person. I mean, some people are very regimented, and so they need to do it at a certain time every day. In the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, she suggests that you write the very first thing in the morning before you do anything else. And she calls them morning pages, and she suggests you write 3 pages. And I did that for many, many years. And it's wonderful writing. It almost comes out of your unconscious because you do it right when you get up in the morning.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a stream of consciousness. It's a wonderful technique.
Yeah, put it maybe next to your bed, and before you get out of bed, you can't get out of bed until you do it.
Right. I literally, I got out of bed because my husband was sleeping. So I went into another room, but it was the very first thing every morning.
My husband sleeps, he gets up before me, but I always have to pee. So I might have to go pee and then go back and do it. But I love that. I really think I'm going to do that because I agree with you. When you wake up is when you're most connected, I think, to that subconscious. Because you wake up with ideas. A lot of times you wake up and then you go back to sleep. If you like, I sometimes will wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll be like, this great idea. And then I'll go, okay, I'm going to write that down when I get up, and then I lose it.
But you have to write down. To me, I have to write down the idea at least because otherwise it's gone.
Yep.
But I wake up sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning and find myself writing for an hour, just because if there's something that I haven't processed, that's the time to do it. But what I say to people is, people say, how do I start? Where do I start? And so what I say is, start with this. Right now I feel, or right now I am. And it's just start with just in this moment, because journaling puts us in the present. And to me, living in the present moment is really important. And so that to me is one of the ways that I'm hoping that, or I need to, or I wish that, just very simply, just giving yourself a simple prompt. And there are prompts, journaling prompts online. All you have to do is just Google journal prompts, and they're there. So journaling prompts for self-care, journaling prompts for self-awareness. All kinds of prompts. But really, just to even start with right now,
Yeah. I always am encouraging, and I recorded a podcast that I'm going to publish later today. I do it sometimes when I might just me, myself, and I'll like record and then I'll publish it the same day. But I did it on big dreams, and that I don't think a lot of people dream big dreams. And so what they really are, because they scare. It's like big dreams. I'm just like a little person. I'm not, how can I have big dreams? But they really are deepest desires. So it's kind of like what they are. And so when a journal prompt that came up for me, because that's fresh in my mind, was if I had $1 million, I would, because
Absolutely.
people can't think limitlessly. So like have fun with it.
Right.
Yeah, I like
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So did we cover everything, capture everything that you wanted to talk about today?
Sure. I'm happy. I feel like
Mhm.
hopefully people will learn something.
Oh,
Gains.
absolutely. I think it's been great. I have enjoyed it, so I think they will. So what do you want to leave with? What message? Uh, how can you tap into, how can someone who's listening who doesn't maybe feel and isn't able as good as you have been able to do, really follow your heart, which is what will spark you ultimately, is to follow your heart. So what words of encouragement, advice can you give to somebody who really desires to live a spark second half life?
I think it's just important to understand that we only have one life, and we have no idea how much time. And so I feel it's important to just do it now. Just if you've got something, I know that in the moments that I am not doing what speaks to my soul, I am not happy. And so to me, the gift we give ourselves is to follow our hearts and to follow our souls and to do what brings us joy in the moment. In the moment. Don't
Yeah.
put it off, because this all we have is right now.
Yeah. The new term is YOLO, right? YOLO. If you see that hashtag or anything, you listening, it means you only live once. And I love the fact that Mel Robbins named one of her dogs that.
And it's true. We do only live one time. And so this is it. This is,
This is
well, who
it.
knows? I mean, who knows what happens after? But for now, this is a
Yeah. This is the only one you're going to remember.
right. This way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. It was a delight to meet you and to
Thank you.
connect and hear about your story. I love what you're
Thank,
doing.
thank you for having me. I've
Okay.
enjoyed talking to you.